My dear friends, our Holy Father has recently published a document on the door of faith, and it is something which merits meditation. In fact, I have just recently spent a whole week doing that in a Cistercian monastery in Italy on that document, breaking it open, and the impact of faith on the soul, and therefore on life, and indeed on death and after death, comes out. It is not indifferent what is in our head. Therefore, it is not indifferent what we let into that head. Youth now is psychologically altered with regard to the amount of things in the head, because many more messages are coming than there had been coming only 30 years ago. Therefore, words do not have the same echo. We are weakened. Our memory is not as competent as it might have been when there were fewer words. We are saturated. But it is more subtle. We are saturated with other people's minds, what they are giving off. Observe. From morning until night, you are picking up other people's thoughts. Go into a supermarket, what will you hear? Go into a bus, what will you hear? Go home, what will you hear? We are plugged in, willy-nilly, into artificial noise, words, and therefore into other souls, other minds. There is a process of erosion. We are becoming a bit like others. There is a norm. There is an accepted way of speaking of things, of seeing things. And if right now the mass media can get away with it, it shows how easily we as sheep are being led by the nose. Resist! In the name of Christ, resist! I want to take you on a journey to the early church. The Holy Father, in this document, indicates the centrality of the cross and resurrection. If you look at the structure of the Gospels, you will find one thing in common. A large proportion is a detailed narrative of the death, and also, except in the case of the original Mark, of the resurrection. Mark, in the original form, has a powerful ending of shock and ecstatic joy. That is what I want to bring you to. It is called the kerygma. Kerysein in Greek is to announce, as a herald. And it was what was announced to the Mediterranean basin, and therefore to the whole inhabited world, by those who had had the shock. Now, the shock, essentially, is this, my friends. It's what happened at one moment in time, in one point in our geography. First of all, we have the atrocity of the cross. And in my room in the Hermitage, I have a miraculous picture which indicates the atrocity of that. It was a photo which was taken by chance of a crucifix which had been cast aside during church renovations in America. But some pious soul took one last picture, and boy, what was his shock when the negative came out. It was Calvary before his eyes. One big shred of a wound, blood all over the place, atrocity to the utmost. For the Jews, it ended there. Now, what happened in the night of Easter? Have you a notebook on you, or have you a good memory? I want you at least to write in your memory 3 points which you, as highly engaged technicians of internet, will easily find. This, by the way, is correct use of internet, a tool which is extremely useful. Because I can't develop the theme, I want you to do it as homework. I want you to go into Google, just type my name, Father David Jones, and you'll find immediately the website, and you'll find a section on homilies, okay? Now I want you to go, first of all, into this last Easter Sunday. I mean the day it was, the high one in the day. There is the night one there on video, but the other one is on audio. And the reason why is that I want you afterwards to follow through the YouTubes that John, who has set up the website, has added on. Because that is for you something you want to be aware of. It's this. To back up the sermon which I had preached on that Easter morning, he found the latest evidence. And all you want to do, if you're handling someone who wants faith, is indicate that. And leave them to it. Don't get into conversations. Just leave them with the YouTube. Actually, there's more than one there. It'll do it for you. Now, I'm not going into it, you do it yourself. But it seems that recently modern science has picked out things that we were not aware of in the Holy Shroud. And amongst many things, the rest of which you will find, there is this. To produce an image like the one that we have on top and underneath, you have something akin to what the scientists call a black hole in the universe. The laws of science are being reversed. And we have on top and on the bottom, that is the two parts of the Holy Shroud, something which could only happen if at the moment of resurrection the body was in suspension, suspended there, not as it would be if it were all folded up and therefore with all these folds in the cloth. Do your homework and you'll see what I mean on these YouTubes coming after the homily. I'm not going to go into any other details, but I'll leave it with you. I make a jump. I want you to note in your mind another homily because of what comes afterwards, the YouTube which follows. It's May the 13th. Still there on my website. Now, you'll find it a Sunday homily of May the 13th. It's easy to remember because it's Our Lady of Fatima. And you'll find there testimony on YouTube of what? What happens every year since then on that same spot? No one, hardly in the Latin Church, I mean those under the Patriarch of the West, talks about it. The reason simply being that since the split between East and West, we don't have the same calendar, except occasionally when by chance they coincide. And therefore we don't share the greatest miracle on earth, because that miracle, my friends, happens every year of the first Bishop of Jerusalem, the Patriarch of Jerusalem, therefore an Orthodox. What happens? He comes into the Holy Sepulchre with all his pomp, and there it's something else, crown and all. Before, however, in ceremony, they have sealed the door of the sepulchre and made sure there's nothing inside first. He comes in, opens his arms, and they divest him, and he indicates there's nothing on his person, nothing in his pocket. He goes in with the bare minimum, in poverty and nudity, as it were. And the door is sealed behind him, therefore he's in utter darkness. What does he do? He, from memory, recites prayers that have come down from the early church, always the same, and in Greek, the language of the early church to a large extent. Usually, he tells us, it's after the end of that prayer, of those prayers from memory in the dark, that it starts. But he does say that there's a certain oscillation in the moment it actually starts. And he's given his testimony, and we have it in writing, because they wanted to know exactly what happened. It's always happened, every year. It starts in the stone of the Holy Sepulchre, where they lay the sacred body. It starts to become lit. Blue light, usually, although it can change colour, starts to come from there. And it comes out from, if you're there, you can see the hole, which is, it's that slit there. It comes out of there. It jumps around and dances in the Holy Sepulchre, usually bluish but changing colour. At that point, those in the outside who would have been looking at the sun would have seen before that the sun radiant with a light around it. But at that point, when that starts, all that stops, and the Holy Sepulchre starts to do things. Lights, flashes, all over the place. They to us look like flashes of camera, but they can't possibly be, and they tell you why on these YouTubes that you'll go into. And at a certain point, when it's starting, and it's all concentrating on the Holy Sepulchre, these flashes of light and light moving in there, certain people, usually monks and nuns in there, their candles, while the patriarch is still in there, start to ignite. And you can see it, light going around, even before he comes out. He comes out, and you can see as the doors open, the whole Holy Sepulchre brilliant with light. He comes out using these very ancient and long candles which they hold ceremoniously, and he plays with it in a solemn way. And the bells are ringing out with all their might in the Holy Sepulchre. And there's ecstatic joy. Now, those who have not had yet their candles lit, the tourists and so on, from on high, want the light. So it comes from that holy light and goes around. But it doesn't stop there. In the first minutes, they play with the light, those who know the phenomenon. The monks play with it on their beard, it doesn't burn. The nuns play with it on their veil, and it doesn't burn in the slightest. And there is more. Those who hold it to their chin, to their person, start to feel an electrifying and ecstatic joy, which is not just a joy of emotion, it's a joy which has come from heaven at that point. The Lord is letting them feel the joy of the angels and of the cosmos. This Easter is the first Easter, and it's the same power coming through. Anastasis, the central core of our kerygma, the oath that sent them round the Mediterranean basin and in a flash converted them. Why? Because the Lord also, and it still happens in mission countries, added his own miracles. We have them in the Acts, but it's always the case in mission countries and the first evangelization. The Lord comes in there and works. Our Ask any missionary who's been to Africa. I make a jump. Going back to the imprint that that explosion made, they have and are still looking into it. I want you to go into another YouTube. Are you listening? The 19th of August, it's actually not last Sunday, but the Sunday before. At the end, you'll find what I was referring to in that sermon. It's a brand new miracle, but it's going to be linked with that, as you'll see when I come to the end now. There have, over the ages, been Eucharistic miracles, as you know. Actually, in Siena, when I was ordained, we had one, and we would carry it on Corpus Christi on the Thursday itself through the streets of Siena. It's the hosts that were stolen in 1730 and found in a money box in another church, but not consumed. They're still exactly as they were, perfectly preserved. And as the Holy Father said, c'è la presenza, there is the presence. Now, if you go into that sermon, the 19th of August, that is Sunday before last, and into the YouTube, you'll find a recent Eucharistic miracle. It was in Buenos Aires. Something happened, and they found that it was real blood of a person alive. All was there, but one thing was missing: the DNA code. That's puzzling. Without saying where it came from, they presented it to the professor who had done the analysis of the Lanciano miracle, which goes back to the 8th century. And he found the same thing, but also this. The same problem is in the one I looked at. The DNA code was missing in the miracle of Lanciano. He said, it's the same man! Do you realize the importance of that? It's evidence that St. Joseph was not involved. That's the only explanation of the absence of the DNA code. Now, they want to get to the Holy Shroud and take out a tiny bit of the blood traces in there, and they are convinced that that will be the last word, that they'll find exactly the same thing. I conclude, my friends, with what the Pope says in that document. He says, there can be no contradiction between faith and reason, and there is no need to be afraid of science, for science handles truth, and all truth is his. When I was a young man, I was an anti-Catholic evangelical Baptist, doing all I could to destroy the Catholic Church. I was knocked between the eyes by the Blessed Sacrament. But there was more. I found that all my doubts were clarified by the serene, calm possession of the truth of the man that Providence gave me as a spiritual father and instructor in the faith. Because whereas before, all my time had been taken up with hot-headed, thumping, destructive arguments, here was a man of academic value, gone through the Oxford Mill and a monk of Ampleforth, in fact the head of its choir for years, who never once had a need to raise his voice, but with a calm, serene possession of the truth, step by step would indicate it could not be otherwise. That, my friends, is a lesson for you as students or young people. Never raise your voice. Be serene in the truth that is greater than yourselves and which is well able to defend itself, e.g. through pointing to places where truth, indeed science, is able to defend itself without any fuss or bother. Just leaving with one last thought. It's this. It matters. Because if we go through life poking fun at faith, poking fun at the means of grace, it means, my friends, that we're the greatest idiots on earth. Because we're going into the beyond not knowing that there's a huge risk, as the gospel itself says, of ending up in darkness forever. Faith and all that goes with it is our insurance policy, my friends. And if we haven't got it, we're on the losing side. Some years ago, in the States, there was a policy to have everywhere around comprehensive insurance, because it was a problem when people got ill and so on. And there was a lot of talk about it when it was happening. One day, the then President, Bill Clinton, decided with his prima donna, Hillary, to go on the goggle box at peak viewing time. She dressed up like some of you, fresh out of college and newlywed, and she was doing the dishes, and he was on the divan admiring his prima donna's beauty because she had her hair laid down in great majesty of glory, and he just looked there while she did the dishes. At a certain point, she turned round and said, "Ah,